Welcome back to my garden. This week is episode 3 in my holiday visit series, and it was going to be 3. It probably still will be, although we've subsequently had a very enjoyable 4th visit from some friends who for the last 5 years have been living in Italy but have come back to Brazil because, even if life is tricky economically in Brazil, just as it is in Italy, at least the weather in the winter is somewhat more manageable. Heating bills are 0. So there we are. 4 visits, not 3, but I think I'll keep this series to the 3 as planned, especially as the 3rd visit kind of rounds things off quite nicely. One of my students from way back when, Rodrigo, has followed a career as a visual artist. He works with ceramics. And for some time we've been speaking about kind of collaborating a little bit. I visited his studio once in Sao Paulo when I was visiting there before a trip to South Africa. And he finally got around to, because of family visits, coming up to the northeast, and he spent 5 or 6 days here. As it happens, family friends are part of an art collective in Fortaleza, so very convenient. He was able to see what they were doing and then plan out our collaboration. And it's part of a sort of broader idea to eventually run a program of, I suppose, what one would call art residencies. How it will all work out in practice, I have no idea. But we're slowly mulling things over, and something interesting is bound to happen. But I say rounds off the series quite nicely, because perhaps a better way of putting it would be follows on from last week. Last week I was speaking about the family visit, which was a road trip. And the kind of visits that I want, that I have in mind, envision here, are probably more like, not road trips, pilgrimages. What do I mean? Well, there is a movement in contemporary art where, rather than trying to be in the big city or a convenient location, artists actually almost go out of their way to be hard to find. Now, that's not specifically what I want to do, but there is a payoff to it. And that is that the process of the visitor, the viewer of your art, actually seeing it, involves an enormous amount of effort. And rather like the road trip, the family visit coming here, the fact that it was somewhat arduous, 4 days sleeping in a van and all of that, rather than just hopping on a plane, kind of added to the eventual enjoyment of the whole trip, and spiced things up a little bit, made it more memorable. I think that's one of the ideas, in this idea of producing your art in the middle of nowhere. That people will actually have to make a conscious decision to see what it is you're doing. And I use the word pilgrimage. Well, of course, that's an incredibly pretentious, overblown way of describing it. But I think it's not totally out of place. Of course, we normally think of pilgrimages in a religious context, Muslims going to Mecca, or Catholics on some sort of trail. I think there's one in San Sebastian. You go on a big long walk and eventually come to days in the hiking, and eventually you find yourself at a significant holy spot. But I think this idea of the pilgrimage goes well beyond, obviously, the realm of the religious. When I moved from South Africa to England, there were certain things that I did that did have a little bit of a pilgrimage feel to it. Planning a long trip to see a musician you particularly like. Well, that's perhaps a bit like a bucket list activity. But watching a football game at Wembley, the things that we sort of put on a wish list. But actually, if that's something that, how can I put it, that is deeply connected with our identity, with what we believe in, then they take on a far greater significance. And in a way, that's what I would like, what I'm looking for in the visit to see my art. It ties in a little bit with outsider art, the world of outsider art, where, I probably need to do a little bit of explaining. Outsider art, art brut, is art made by those untouched by sort of, shall we say, cultural awareness. It kind of became a thing, and initially was very much rooted in the art produced by people under very extreme psychological conditions, mental illness, or people who discovered art in a long prison sentence. They'd received no formal schooling. For most of us, to make art that is devoid of cultural influence is very, very difficult, unless, of course, you are schizophrenic or have suffered some exceptional trauma. But in with that whole area of outsider art is art made by people that, I suppose, feel in some sense compelled. In one case in France, the artist in question describes how he had a religious vision. These kind of artists become compelled to make art, whether inspired by the voice of an angel or just an idea that takes hold, and they pursue it to the very end. And they do it wherever they are. And what they, very often, in one area of outsider art that I'm particularly interested in, they end up making some kind of monumental installation. A classic example is the Watts Towers. 3 towers built in Los Angeles by an illiterate Italian labourer, and they are immense structures made out of a combination of found materials and cement, that sort of enormous 30-40 metre kind of like very thin minarets. They've got a Gaudi-esque feel to it, if you're familiar with the Spanish architect. By the way, if you hear some meowing, my cat has come to visit. Bobbles, the cat who adopted us and isn't going anywhere and wants to be part of the video. Anyway, back to art. So this artist made these, for reasons that no one really can quite explain, he certainly didn't, made these 3 enormous towers, entirely self-taught, and as it turns out, incredibly well engineered, despite his total lack of background, book learning that would make such a structure possible. And I kind of have that idea about where we are producing something that eventually people will hear about and make the trip to visit, and it will become a sort of on the one case, it will be a kind of art road trip, but in another sense, I would like it to be, in a way, without putting myself on a pedestal where I feel I'm offering some kind of deep insight. So it's a sort of spiritual retreat in an artistic sense. That's not what I mean, but where people will feel that coming to visit here is somehow worth the enormous effort it will take. I see this idea of the road trip and the pilgrimage being sort of flip sides of a similar coin. The road trip is something where you embark on something that might be quite normal, but the extent of the journey, the awesomeness of the undertaking kind of gives it a far greater meaning. And in the case of the pilgrimage, it's not, if you go from New York to LA, the cross-continental road trip, there's nothing particularly remarkable about Los Angeles. Okay, it's a big city, but it's another big city. But it's the journey that really makes all the difference. In the case of the pilgrimage, the destination is in and of itself incredibly important. Now, again, does that mean I'm putting my art small holding on that sort of footing? Well, at the moment, not yet, but that's the sort of ambition, to have something where there is enough art. There is something on offer that will make it a real draw. If I think of the outsider art sort of installations, kind of venues, I'm not sure what the right word would be, the sort of places that an artist might have constructed. And there's, intriguingly, there's a lot of them all over the world, where artists have done quite incredible things, embarking on constructing, creating something, and it takes decades to sort of reach a point where the pilgrimage kind of becomes something worth undertaking for the art believer, shall we say. Let's force the metaphor that way. A classic example is in northern India, Nek Chand's rock garden. Nek Chand was a gentleman who sort of oversaw, I suppose, a road building foreman. And in his spare time, he started collecting building rubble and broken ceramic pieces and made these sculptures out in the middle of the bush, very well hidden. And decades passed, and eventually it has become what is now a world famous tourist attraction, Nek Chand's rock garden. And it's on a sort of 30-acre area, and there are tens of thousands of these sculptures that he's produced. And they're very interesting art objects, interest in their sort of naive simplicity. But they gain a power by the enormous, the sheer quantity of work that he produced. And this was only really possible because it was in the middle of nowhere. If he'd started producing these in the city centre, well, the project wouldn't have got very far. The local town planners would have said, no, not here, you don't. The land would have had a sort of additional value, and in a way that is the sort of state of play here. We wouldn't have done what we've done near Sao Paulo simply because land would have been too expensive. So the third of the visits really is the start of what I hope will grow into a remarkable thing, and I hope the first artist of many that will not just come and visit what I'm doing, but come to stay and make art here eventually, here with me. And sorry about the little bump, that was Bobbles the cat. And I guess Bobbles is telling me, you've gone on long enough, it's time to wrap things up. So that's it. Trust your lives are filled with joy. Let me know what you think, and until next week from a sunny Brazil, ciao.